Alright, the next step is to put the bushing, the bearing support, and the power cylinder onto the top plate. You're going to need two 3/4 inch O-rings and two 5/16 O-rings, as well as five 3/8 long 632 socket head cap screws, 5 in total, and two flathead 632 screws as well. You're going to need a 5/64 Allen key and a 7/64 inch Allen key. Okay, so I'll start by putting on the O-ring. Now I've pre-greased these, so at this point, if you haven't done that, you should pre-grease these with O-ring grease. So I'll put those in just like that, and I'm going to line up these three holes as close as possible to these three holes in the top plate. So just like that, and then I'm going to just start it off by hand. Okay, I'm going to take the 7/64 Allen key and just get them snug to the surface of the bushing. And I'll do that to each screw. Once you've done that, it's time to start evenly screwing this bushing to the plate. You want the bottom surface of the bushing to be parallel with the top surface of the plate, so that you get a nice seal and nice aligned hole in the bushing. So what I'm going to do is just turn it a 1/4 inch on one screw, and then move to the next screw and move it another 1/4 inch, or not 1/4 inch, but a 1/4 turn. And I'll just keep going around like that until it's tight. Now I do recommend using the small lever for leverage, because if you use the large lever like this, you're at risk of stripping the threads in the aluminum plate. So just go slow and use the small lever for leverage, and you can get it reasonably tight. Okay, so now I've gotten this tight to the top plate. I'm going to put on the bearing support, and the bearing support already has the bearings pressed into it and the axle mounted to it at this point. So I'll start by putting the 5/16 O-rings into the grooves. And again, these are pre-greased, so if you haven't done that yet, you want to grease these before doing the next step. Okay, and so I'm going to align these two holes in the bearing support to these two holes right here. Now it doesn't matter if it goes on like this or like that. Now I've flipped the plate over with the bearing support underneath, and now I'm going to take the flathead screws and I'm going to put them into the bearing support from the bottom side of the top plate. And I'll use the 5/64 inch Allen key for this screw. So again, I'm just going to get it snug on both sides, and I'm going to evenly tighten down both of these screws. So I'll do a quarter turn on this side and a quarter turn on this side, and go back and forth so that I get a nice level bearing support. Okay, so I just finished tightening this down. The bearing support is nice and seated against the top plate. Now I did end up having to use the long end of the Allen key for leverage, and this thread in this aluminum bearing support is less susceptible to stripping because it is a longer thread in total. But just make sure you don't put too much force on this and cause the threads to strip out. So now I have the brass bushing on and the bearing support on. I'm going to now put on the power cylinder. So first I'll put the greased O-ring into the O-ring groove, make sure that's seated nicely, and then put the power cylinder onto the top plate. And again, you want to make sure that you've lined up these holes reasonably well. So I'll drop my final 2 cap screws into the holes. And I'll just get them lined up and fastened loosely. Okay, so I've fastened this loosely to it. There's still movement in it, as you can see, and I want to leave it like that for this at this point. We will fasten it down when we put in the nylon screw, but there's a few more steps that we have to do before we get to that point. So I'm going to set this aside now,